Carl Jung once said, the thing that comes closest to describing reality is paradox. Hegel spoke of it as a dialectic, the seeming synthesis of opposites to a greater good. In Zen, we call it dualism, mind versus body, self versus other, life versus death. Those are some of the great dualities that Zen takes aim at. And in this flip, we work from that same resolution of dualism, from or to and. This is a stage in adult development, a critical stage for leaders to be able to lead through more complex environments. Not everyone can do it. You think back, for example, in the auto industry from years ago, and there used to be a very forced choice or between, say, cost or quality. Which one did you want? If you wanted good quality, you were going to pay a lot of money for it. And if you wanted a good price, you weren't going to get very good quality. But then what happened in the 1980s? Toyota came along and was able to combine or synthesize the quality movement with the economies of mass manufacturing to get to a higher level goodness where cost and quality became possible. And it raised the whole standard of the auto industry. That's what's possible when we get to a higher level good. And that's why it becomes such worthy work in our lives and in our leadership. Breathing gives us a good paradigm to work from in thinking how this process is done. So think of it for a moment. Inhale versus exhale. We know both are right. We know we need both, but we can't do both at the same time. We're doing one or the other. We know both have value. You take in a breath and you could feel oxygen and it raised my energy. But if I stay here too long, I start to get signals that tell me, wait a minute, that's enough. Go to the other side. Naturally, I'd want to exhale. And as you know, relaxing is part of what comes with exhale. Carbon dioxide goes out, I settle down, I calm down. But if I stayed here too long, here too, I would start to get signals that would say, enough already, shift. Now, you and I don't breathe at the extremes because we get these signals that tell us what enough is. And it's that same principle that can guide us in managing any paradox. Barry Johnson gives us a powerful tool for doing this, for being able to map out a paradox, to draw a picture of it and know how to gauge enoughness and shift signals to know when we move from one side to another. And this is something we play with in this flip. It starts with first being able to see two sides and name them. Good to be able to write them down as two ends of an axis and draw a line between them, such as this. I encourage you to do that. It could be between self and other, your point of view and someone else's point of view. It could be short-term, long-term. It could be life versus work. It could be any number of things that pose a tension in how you set your own priorities now. And then the next step is to, we say, map four. Map the four quadrants of what's good about each side, but also what's concerning if I stay here too long. And it's actually most fruitful if you actually walk through this with yourself, to physically, metaphorically stand on the side of force one and feel into its value, what's good and wonderful about this force, and write a few things down in that upper left-hand quadrant. And when you have a few things, then say, what happens if I stay here too long? And kind of step down into that quadrant of concerns. What starts to happen if I overdo force one or use it exclusively? Because that's always what happens in life if we stick with one thing too long. Write a few things down in the lower quadrant. And so then naturally, I'd want to bring in force two, so metaphorically or physically move up into what's good and valuable about force two, and write a few things down in the upper right quadrant. And then if I stayed here too long, move down into its concerns and feel into and write a few things for what's concerning about force two. So once you've mapped the four quadrants, you now have a guide for being able to think about first, what's the greater good if I get the best of both? What's the upper level goal or beauty or goodness or truth I can reach if I get something from each side? You can state that higher level goal. It can guide us. It can guide us in knowing when to shift, because you may have found even in mapping the 4 quadrants that you have some bias or preference for force 1 over force 2 or the other way around. And yet recognizing you need both. And knowing when to shift is this 3rd step, which is, we call it managing the figure 8, the dynamic movement between the 2 sides that can virtuously move us toward that upper level goal. So you think through, what are the shift signals? What would guide me the same way my own body guides me in knowing when it's time to go between inhale and exhale? Sometimes they're measures. Sometimes it's a sense or a feeling. Sometimes it's an inner state that I know, or sometimes it's explicit, so good minds can agree on it together. But it's important to have shift signals on both sides so you can regulate the whole system. And when you're able to do this, you can move from what's sometimes called tyranny of the or to the greater goodness of the and.